Hello, we welcome you to the program today. We're continuing in our series of study in the Book of Ecclesiastes. Today we will continue with chapter 9 of the Book of Ecclesiastes. And so if you will, please turn to Ecclesiastes chapter 9 and verse 1. Verses 1 through 2, death comes to all. Verse 1. For I considered all this in my heart, so that I could declare it all. That the righteous and the wise and their works are in the hand of God. People know neither love nor hatred by anything they see before them. Before we look at this verse in particular, consider briefly a review of some things we looked at in the previous chapter. According to Solomon, in this world, the sinner may have a long life. However, he knew that it would be well for those who fear God, even if their life in this world is short. It appears that Solomon spoke of the world to come. Even if those who fear God have a short life, God will prolong their life. Where? Apparently in the world to come. Even if the wicked have a long life, that life will be but a shadow, with God not prolonging their life in the world to come. You see, as you look at Ecclesiastes 8:12 to 13, there are those perhaps who commit sin who have a long life. It may be said that their life is prolonged. In the grand scheme of things, though it is but a shadow. However, those who fear God, he will prolong their life. And it appears that this is not necessarily in this world, but in the world to come. In Ecclesiastes 8 and 14, we learn how that on the earth, there are times that the just get what the wicked deserve, and the wicked get what the just deserve. However, we know that from what he taught, that there will be a judgment for all. Ecclesiastes 8 and 14. We note that in this world, Solomon saw that working for a living, enjoying, eating, and drinking the food and the drink for which he has labored was a blessing from God. The man who fears God sees the fruit of his labor as being given by the hand of God. Look in Ecclesiastes 8 and 15. Also in Ecclesiastes 2:24 and 5:18 to 20. Finally, life lived apart from God is a life of vanity. Live in the fear of God, trust in him. Ecclesiastes 8:16 to 17. So a brief review of chapter 8:12 to verse 17. Now, the reason why I gave a brief review of the previous chapter is found here in chapter 9, verse 1. For I considered all this in my heart. And so Solomon considered all this in his heart so that he could declare it all, so that he could explain it all. All this includes what he taught earlier in the previous chapter. In Ecclesiastes 8:12 to 17. Based on what he taught, he now declares that all is in the hand of God. It is the will of God that we ought to consider today. He says there are people who are not able to know by what they see before them in this world, whose works God loves or whose works God hates. Some might look at somebody's life and say, oh, this person lived a long life, and so they must be pleasing in the sight of God. However, that's not always the case. Someone might look at someone who lived a short life and say, well, their life must not be pleasing in the sight of God. That's not necessarily the case either. And so you may have the righteous who live a short life, while it may be the case that the sinner lives a long life, or vice versa. And so people are not able to know based upon what they see before them in this world, that is based on whether someone has a long life or someone has a short life, whether those people's works are pleasing to God, whether God loves or hates that person's works. So he said, I consider all this in my heart so that I could explain it, declare it, that the righteous and the wise and the works are in the hands of God. And so ultimately, let God's will be done, whatever his will be. People know neither love nor hatred. That is, people know neither love nor hatred of God. Everything's in the hands of God. People know neither love nor hatred of God by anything they see before them. Again, whether someone live a long life or a short life. Verse 2, all things come alike to all. One event happens to the righteous and the wicked, to the good, the clean, and the unclean, to him who sacrifices and him who does not sacrifice. As is the good, so is the sinner. He who takes an oath, as he who fears an oath. And so there's one event that happens to everyone, death. Solomon perceived that the same event happens both to the wise and to the fool. Ecclesiastes 2:14, and also verse 16. Death also comes for the righteous and the wicked, for the good and the bad, for the ceremonially clean and the ceremonially unclean, for the one who sacrifices to God and the one who does not sacrifice. This is true for the good. It's also true for the sinner. This is true for he who takes an oath rashly and he who takes an oath in the fear of God. And so one event happens to all, death. Verse 3 to 10, we see, though, that there is hope for the living. Verse 3, this is an evil in which all that is done under the sun, that one thing happens to all. Truly, the hearts of the sons of men are full of evil. Madness is in their hearts while they live, and after that they go to the dead. In this world, there is vanity. And despite all of our work, death comes to all. For example, those people who are full of envy and madness while they live, one day they will leave this world to join the dead, those who have died before. Despite living only for this world, the wicked will leave this world in death. And so they may want to take it with them, but that's not possible, as we've seen in Ecclesiastes. By teaching that the wicked will go to the dead does not mean that Solomon believed that there is no life after death. While the body after death returns to the dust of the earth, Solomon taught that the spirit returns to God. Ecclesiastes 12 and verse 7. Also in Ecclesiastes 3 and 11, we learn that God has put eternity in the hearts of the sons of men. Ecclesiastes 3 and 11. Verse 4. He says, but for him who is joined to all the living, there is hope. For a living dog is better than a dead lion. For the wicked that go to the dead, there is no hope. However, he who remains with the living, there is still hope. There is still time to fear God and to keep his commandments. There is still time to repent, to amend one's ways while in this world. But for him who is joined to all the living, there is hope. He says, for a living dog is better than a dead lion. And so Solomon teaches by proverb that while a lion may be better than a dog, the living dog is better than a dead lion. For example, consider the lion in the book of Proverbs. Solomon wrote in Proverbs 28:1, "The righteous are bold as a lion." And so he taught the boldness of the righteous. Bold as a lion. Solomon also wrote of how the lion is said to be fierce in Proverbs 26:11 and 13. And so he wrote of the dog and the lion. Agur, in the book of Proverbs, chapter 30 and 30, wrote, "A lion which is mighty among beasts and does not turn away from any." And so he described the lion as being mighty and strong. A lion may be mightier than a dog, that's true, but a living dog is better than a dead lion. In the Bible, we see that the dog is often viewed negatively in the scriptures. Passages like Deuteronomy 23:17-18, and also Exodus 22 and 31. Regardless of how someone might feel in this sense, we see that while the lion may be fierce and bold and mighty and not turn away from any beast in fear, we see that he says a living dog is better than a dead lion. And so the point is that while we are living, there is still hope. Verse 5, "For the living know that they will die, but the dead know nothing, and they have no more reward, for the memory of them is forgotten." For the living, he says, there is still hope, knowing that they will die. There is still time to make amends for their evil and for their madness. So if Solomon is talking about the wicked, as long as they still live, then there's still time to repent, to make amends for their evil and madness. There remains an opportunity to fear God and keep his commandments. However, the dead, that is, those who were wicked, who have died, he says, they know nothing. The dead know nothing. That is, they know no hope. The context is hope. We've seen that from verse 3 to the present verse in verse 5. That while those who have died, apart from God, there is no hope. There is still hope for those who still live. And so here in verse 5, the living know that they will die. But what did that dead know? Well, they've already died. And so that's no longer available to know. They've already died. And so the only opportunity they have in living for hope, now they don't have that. And so he makes the point that for them, there is no more hope. No more hope in this world to make amends. They've already died. And so there's no more opportunity. And so while the dead know nothing, that is, they know no hope. They also have no more reward. When Solomon tested his heart with pleasure, he said, "For my heart rejoiced in all my labor, and this was my reward from all my labor," in Ecclesiastes 2 and 10. However, he found that all his works and labor were vanity apart from God. Any reward people may have in this world apart from God is no more in death. The memory of them is forgotten. And in this context, to be forgotten is to die. Solomon here wrote, "The dead know nothing." First, this does not mean that there is no consciousness after death. And so when he said that the dead know nothing, that does not mean that Solomon thought that there is no consciousness after death. Second, some have suggested that those who die have no knowledge of what is occurring in this world. That may be true. It very well may be true. However, in the context, Solomon taught that the living know that they will die, and so there's still hope. Verse 4. But the dead are dead, and so have no hope. They have no hope of amending their ways. They have no hope of repenting of their sins. They have no hope of fearing God and keeping his commandments. Their time under the sun is no more. Verse 6. He said, also their love, their hatred, and their envy have now perished. Nevermore will they have a share in anything done under the sun. And so those who have died, they have no more reward under the sun. They have perished. Their love, their hatred, and their envy have also perished. They will never again have a share in anything done in this world. In Ecclesiastes 4:4, Solomon taught how men suffer through envy. And so if he's continuing to talk about the wicked who have died, well, their love, their hatred, their envy, all that has now perished along with them. They no more have a share in this world. Verse 7. Go eat your bread with joy and drink your wine with a merry heart, for God has already accepted your works. It appears here that he's talking about those perhaps who fear God rather than those who were practicing evil, who were sinners, who were wicked. Enjoy what you eat and what you drink. This instruction is for those whose works were already accepted by God, to those who did good. Remember how Solomon taught how God gives these things to man and gives man the power to enjoy these things. In Ecclesiastes 3:13 and chapter 5:19, Solomon called this the gift of God. Verse 8. Let your garments always be white, and let your head lack no oil. Here the lesson is to enjoy the gift of God. Verse 7 and 8. The wearing of white garments here is a sign of joy. In the scriptures, white can symbolize purity, festivity, and joy. Here in this passage, let your garments always be white. And so the idea of enjoying or having joy over the things that God has blessed you with in this world, the gift of God. And so the wearing of white here, of white garments, may be a sign of joy. The anointing of the head with oil was an occasion for joy. And so customarily, oil was given by the host to the guest. The prophet Isaiah spoke of how the Messiah would console those in Zion. In Isaiah 61:3, Jesus quoted verses 1 and 2 of Isaiah 61 in the New Testament. The oil of joy for mourning and the garment of praise for the spirit of heaviness. And so here we have the idea of one for the other. And so with the Messiah, giving the oil of joy and the garment of praise. In Psalm 133 and verse 2, he taught how good and how pleasant it is to dwell in unity. Psalm 133 and verse 2, it is like the precious oil upon the head, running down the beard of Aaron, running down on the edge of his garments. Garments and oil are mentioned in that passage as well, though the collar of the garment's not mentioned. There are different reasons for wearing white garments. White garments may be the appropriate choice for the climate, for the land. It may be that it's a symbol of joy, as we've already mentioned, or of purity or festivity. But in this case here, we see that he describes unity like it was that precious oil on the head, or like the garments here in verse 2. Verse 9, live joyfully. And so again, the idea of joy and living joyfully continues. Eat your bread with joy. Let your garments be white, your head lack no oil. Again, this may be a symbol of the white garments and of the oil, of joy, an occasion of joy, of having the oil provided. And now in verse 9, live joyfully. So in the context, that appears to be the case. Live joyfully with a wife whom you love all the days of your vain life, which he has given you under the sun. All your days of vanity, for that is your portion in life and in the labor which you perform under the sun. Solomon taught, live joyfully with the wife whom you love. These are beautiful words. Enjoy your life with the woman you love all the days of your life. That's the way it ought to be. And as we study the New Testament, we learn that marriage is supposed to be for life. Solomon taught, enjoy your life with your wife, whom you love. Of course, husbands and wives ought to love one another, and their love ought to continue to be for each other all the days of their life. The term vain may be also translated as fleeting, like in Proverbs 21:6. We've already studied this word vain in the beginning of our series, of our study of the Book of Ecclesiastes. It's a word that is literally shadow. And so the idea of something being transitory, something being fleeting, passing, temporary, is often the meaning. Proverbs 21:6, again, fleeting. Or in this case here, the idea of them having a fleeting life, a brief life. Yes, they may have a long life as far as many years are concerned, but whether you live many years or a few years, in the grand scheme of things, life is still short. The days of life pass by swiftly. And so the lesson is to enjoy all the days of your life, all the days which God has given you in this world. He said, that is your portion in life, your heritage and your portion. That is your share in life. And so enjoy what God has given you. Fear God and keep his commandments, realizing how very fleeting, how brief life is. And of course, from the beginning of the book, Solomon describing a life apart from God as a life of vanity. Here in this passage, the idea of your vain life, again, I think it's describing here the temporary nature, the fleeting nature of the days of her life. The book of Proverbs describes the excellent and virtuous wife, such as in Proverbs 5:18 and 19, chapter 12:14, chapter 18:22, chapter 19:14, and also chapter 31 and verse 10. This wife of valor, this excellent wife, this virtuous wife. Sadly, Solomon allowed certain women to turn his heart away from God. 1 Kings 11:4. From what he taught in Ecclesiastes, it appears that Solomon may have renewed his loyalty to God. And so while there was a time in his life that his loyalty was divided, that his heart was turned away from God, we see that it appears from this book that he may have renewed his loyalty to God. Certainly, he recognized what he ought to do. There's little doubt. And as you study the book of Ecclesiastes, he describes a life apart from God as a life of vanity, and concludes the book by giving the all of man, fear God and keep his commandments. We certainly hope that Solomon made amends and repented of his sins during his life. Chapter 9 and verse 10. Whatever your hand finds to do, do it with all your might. For there is no work or device or knowledge or wisdom in the grave where you are going. And so the lesson, enjoy the work and fruit of your labor while you live in this world. Solomon taught, whatever your hand finds to do, do it with your might. Some versions add, do it with all your might. Once in the grave where you're going, the time for such work, device, knowledge, or wisdom, as we find in this world, will be over. The term grave in this passage is from the Hebrew word Sheol, as we find in Proverbs 1 in verse 12. And some versions transliterate that word as Sheol. According to Agur, in Proverbs 30 and 16, the grave is not satisfied. He described the grave as one of those things that can never be satisfied. More and more. Sheol is said to be the realm of the dead. And so the waiting place of the dead after the dead depart this world. Number 3, time and chance, verses 11 and 12. Solomon said, I returned and saw under the sun that the race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, nor bread to the wise, nor riches to men of understanding, nor favor to men of skill, but time and chance happen to them all. Some outcomes are expected. Man is not surprised when the swift runner wins the race, or when the strong wins the battle, when the wise make a good living, or when the understanding obtain riches, or when men with skill receive favor. However, it's not always the case. There are times in this world when the unexpected happens. And so we would normally expect these things, such as the race to the swift and the battle to the strong. It's not always that way. Time and chance happen to them all. David trusted in the Lord. As I looked at this passage, one of the things I thought about was 1 Samuel 17 and verse 47, where we see David, who trusted in God, saying, the battle is the Lord's. The battle is the Lord's. What Solomon wrote here in verse 11, nor the battle to the strong, reminded me of what David wrote. The battle, or what David said, the battle is the Lord's. Think about how David defeated Goliath. Goliath was the champion of the Philistines. However, the youth David defeated the strong champion of the Philistines. 1 Samuel 17 and 51. Later in the chapter, Solomon tells a story about a poor and wise man in chapter 9, 13 to 15. And that'll better illustrate what we see here. Again, time and chance happen to them all. Whether they're swift, strong, wise, understanding, skillful, such is the case. Verse 12, he says, for man does not know his time. Like fish taken in a cruel net, like birds caught in a snare. So the sons of men are snared in an evil time, when it falls suddenly upon them. As Solomon said in verse 11, time and chance happen to them all. While the event of death happens to everyone, no one knows precisely the time of his death. As a bird is taken in a net, or as a fish is taken in a net, or birds are caught in a snare, so men often die suddenly and unexpectedly. Verse 12. Verses 13 to 18. Wisdom is great. This wisdom I have also seen under the sun, and it seemed great to me. And so Solomon noticed an example of wisdom in the world, which was to him noteworthy. He said, it seemed great to me. And so it appears that this impressed him. Verse 14. There was a little city with few men in it, and a great king came against it, besieged it, and built great snares around it. And so he told a story about a little city with a few people in it. There was a great king who came against the city. Another version reads, powerful. And so there's this great king, this powerful king who came against this little city. And this king besieged the city. He surrounded it with his men of war. He built great snares around the city. In this case, the snare is not for a bird, but for men. In this case, these snares were these works or buildings which were made by the king's men in order to entrap the city during the siege. Some other versions read siege works or works of siege. And so he surrounded the city. He built these structures. And we see that he continued in his assault. Did this story happen? Well, this story may or may not have been based upon a historical event. Solomon may have simply told the story in order to illustrate his lesson about wisdom. Ecclesiastes 9, 16 to 18. However, it very well could have been about a particular city that he had in mind. But the main point is that he's using it as an example of the wisdom that was in his consideration, that seemed great to him. Verse 15, he says, now there was found in it a poor wise man, and he by his wisdom delivered the city, yet no one remembered that same poor man. And so in the little city was a man who was wise, but was poor. When the great king came against the city, this man delivered the city by his wisdom. He saved the city. The vanity is that no one remembered how the poor man saved the city. Verse 16. Then I said, wisdom is better than strength. Nevertheless, the poor man's wisdom is despised, and his words are not heard. The wisdom of the poor man was better than the might of the great and powerful king, who by his wisdom delivered or saved the little city. Solomon taught wisdom is better than strength. It is true that wisdom is superior to might. It is also true that time and chance happen to them all, as we learned earlier. The race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong. Well, again, we might expect the swiftest runner to win the race or the strongest man to win the battle. It doesn't always happen that way. Nevertheless, the poor man's wisdom is despised. So even though man by his wisdom saved the city, there were those who despised his wisdom. And this is often the case. Makes no sense that people would despise his wisdom, particularly the man who delivered the city. However, that's often the case with people, and it is today. The people look down on his words with disrespect, not because his words are unworthy in and of themselves, but because the man is poor. They do not listen. What a shame. What a shame if that little city could have been saved but was lost because they would not heed the words of this man. In the story, the man's, by his wisdom, the city was delivered. But what about those who will disregard what a wise man says just because he's poor? Foolishness. Vanity. Verse 17. Words of the wise spoken quietly should be heard rather than the shout of a ruler of fools. People should listen to the wise, whether they are rich or poor. Our attention should not be paid to the loudest, but to the wisest, who might just very well be the quietest. Being rich and powerful does not always mean that someone is worthy of respect or that their words are true. Someone might be more willing to accept the words of a rich man just because he's rich. And that's not wise. Someone might be willing to accept the words of the powerful just because they are powerful. However, we know that might does not make right. Likewise, the man who shouts the loudest is not always the one who is correct. Unfortunately, some people are convinced by others if those people are confident and loud, even if they are wrong. That's certainly regrettable. And so, while this man may have been quiet, his words were still words of wisdom and ought to have been heard. Solomon brought the people's attention to this matter. Verse 18, he concludes the chapter. Wisdom is better than weapons of war, but one sinner destroys much good. Earlier he said wisdom is better than strength. Now he says wisdom is better than weapons of war. While the words of the poor wise man saved the city in verse 14 and 15, think how much harm one sinner can cause. And we'll leave that with you today. Think about that matter. How much damage can one sinner cause? How much good can one sinner destroy? Unfortunately, there are many people who are listening to those who speak the loudest when they ought to be listening more carefully to those who speak quietly, who speak words of wisdom. We hope that you have learned from the lesson today more about Ecclesiastes 9, and we encourage you to continue your study of this great book. We invite you to return next time. Lord willing, we'll continue with Ecclesiastes chapter 10. In the meantime, we wish you the very best, and we look forward to the next opportunity. Thank you for being here today.